You're listening to Inside the Village, where all news is local and no topic is off limits.
So help me, Bob, it's bully in the alley. Hey, bully in the alley. So help me, Bob.
This is Inside the Village for the week of June 14th, 2023. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Michael Friscolanti, editor-in-chief here at Village Media, is in the studio, as is Derek Turner, executive producer of the show. Good to be back. How are things?
Excellent. Very, very busy day. Holy cow.
And we're going to get to that in a minute.
Very busy.
Okay, I have to ask, Sunday, tell me you watched the Canadian Open.
I did not watch the Canadian Open. I know everybody keeps asking if I watched that. Apparently, it's a big putt. A lot of Canadians jumped on the green.
It was, you know what? I'm not going to lie. I shed a tear.
You did?
I did.
But you're always crying.
What does that even mean? I'm an emotional person.
You are.
I'm in touch with my I'm in touch with my emotions. There's nothing wrong with that.
Clearly.
But to have clearly, look, I'll be the smartass here. To have a Canadian win the Canadian Open for the first time in 54 years.
Yeah.
And to have him come from behind. I certainly didn't have Nick Taylor on the bingo card, but to win in that dramatic fashion, sinking a 72-foot putt on the fourth playoff hole against Tommy Fleetwood, unimaginable.
In the rain? Was there rain? Or
there was a slight drizzle.
Slight drizzle, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I know that there was all the news about Live, and the two tours have come together now, and that was the big news dominating the Canadian Open.
Yeah, and you know what? You had to feel badly for RBC and for the Canadian Open, because now this is 2 years in a row, 2 tournaments in a row, that the event has been overshadowed by Live. Last year, it was the announcement of Live and players defecting to this new tournament or this new league, and then this year it's the merging of the European Tour, Live, and of course the PGA Tour. So RBC, just a wonderful sponsor of golf, overshadowed.
I'm sure a lot of people shed a tear for RBC.
Well,
people are often feeling bad for the big banks.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a fair point. Anyway, good for Nick Taylor.
Some of those interviews, there would have been an RBC logo behind them as they're talking to what this guy thinks of Live and what that guy thinks of Live, wouldn't they? About the big billboards behind them?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, lots of billboards.
Okay.
RBC logos on the shirts.
Yeah, I'm sure they did okay.
But still, for Canada, it's the one national event. It's our national Open. But to have it won by a Canadian.
I'll tell you, well, it shows you how little I watch golf these, but the headline that struck me the most was, Mike Weir had a good tournament too. And then I saw this picture of Mike Weir, and he was 59 years old. Is that what they said? 57 years old?
Yeah, Weirsy, as they call him, former Masters champion from 2003, had a fantastic tournament. Actually, all the Canadians, I think, did very well.
But imagine, Mike Weir's in his 50s. That's crazy.
The guy who stole the show and probably didn't want to in this fashion was Adam Hadwin. So what happens, once the guys are done playing, they get changed out of their golf attire, put their street clothes on, and they're following, Nick in the playoff against Fleetwood. So Nick makes the putt, and Hadwin runs onto the green with a bottle of champagne to celebrate. Security guard doesn't recognize him and tackles him like a linebacker in the NFL. Right body slam down on the green because he didn't recognize him. Huh. So you've got Nick Taylor, you've got Nick Taylor's caddy trying to, peel the security guard off of Hadwin because the poor guy didn't recognize him without his RBC logo on his hat.
That's pretty funny, actually. That's pretty funny.
Anyway, it was a cool story and good for Nick Taylor. Okay, first word to Frisco. Breaking news out of the Trillium today.
Yeah, we've been talking about this all day. You should be reading it. You'll be able to read about it by now on the Trillium. Another big scoop regarding Doug Ford from Charlie Pinkerton and our editor-in-chief Jessica Smith-Cross, quarterbacking over there. But essentially, the Integrity Commissioner is looking into a lobbying firm of Doug Ford's longtime right-hand man, Amin Massoudi. And Charlie lays out all the stuff he's learned about what the Integrity Commissioner is looking into and why. It's a fascinating read and just another window into sort of behind-the-scenes politics that happens at Queen's Park. So definitely you want to check that out on the Trillium.
Another behind-the-scenes moment courtesy of the 800-pound gorilla, as friend of the show Vic Fideli calls him. Okay, to Guelph, and Canada's smallest bar unfortunately receiving a little bit of bad news this week.
I love this story, right? We read about it months ago, and it's Canada's smallest bar. And what's it called again?
Standing room only.
I don't know why I keep forgetting that. Standing room. Like, it's literally probably smaller than this room.
Yeah, and it's not 9 people?
9 people, yeah. So I guess they asked the city for the permission to put out a licensed patio. And the city's committee of adjustment has basically said, no, we're not going to allow for that minor variance. You can have a patio, apparently, but not a licensed patio. So I don't know, you could go there and get a Diet Coke, I guess. But
that's sad news.
But a fascinating story, yeah.
Absolutely. And speaking of fascinating, another newsworthy landlord out of Sault Ste. Marie.
For sure. If you live in the Sault, you've been following this reporting. James Hopkins has been writing about a lot of landlords in town. Specifically last year, we had a landlord who was fined $120,000 for fire code violations. And if you remember the story, we had to go to court to get the documents and find out who it is because the city's fire department wouldn't tell us. So last week, out of the blue, they issue another press release saying another landlord has been fined $95,000 for various fire code violations. But again, we're not going to tell the public or, God forbid, the people who might live in this building where these fire code violations are. We're not going to tell you who it is. So again, James goes back to court, pulls the property records, finds out who the owner is. It's a company from in the Barrie area, phones them up. And the president of the company says, well, this is the first I've heard of it. I have no idea what's happening. I'm going to file an appeal, right? It's like this has been winded through the courts, and he was found guilty in absentia. So, again, I say the same thing on every week on the show, but this is the importance of local journalism, right?
No question.
I can only explain to you that when that initial story went up saying about the fine, Facebook lit up with, well, who's the landlord? Why don't we know who he is? Why don't they tell us? Well, that's journalism's job, to go and find the facts and tell people in the community who that landlord is, because they have the right to know that. That's not a $5 parking ticket this person got. They had $95,000 in fire code violations means that the fire department was concerned that people's lives were at risk. And so I'm proud of that kind of reporting. We're seeing it across the chain all the time, and it's the reason people turn to us.
Absolutely, and good on James for digging it up and chasing that story down. Okay, speaking of fires, today on the show, fires literally, figuratively, all around us in the province of Ontario, and in fact, right across the country for that matter. Eric Kennedy, the Associate Professor of Disaster and Emergency Management from York University, is going to join us. Should be an interesting chat.
I can't wait.
All right, Eric Kennedy joins us next when we return on Inside the Village right after this.
Reporters, editors, and journalists who go the extra mile to get the story and get it right. Go behind the scenes with those who cover the stories that matter most to you and your community. Look for it in the Village Features section of your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Welcome back to Inside the Village. I'm Scott Sexsmith alongside Village Media Editor-in-Chief Michael Friscolanti, joined on the line from the United Kingdom by Eric Kennedy, the Associate Professor of Disaster and Emergency Management at York University. Eric, good of you to join us on Inside the Village. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's talk fires, Eric. Forest fires are an annual event. Why are we not better prepared for them?
They certainly are a regular occurrence here in Canada. We routinely deal with fires across the country, and much of the country has evolved to depend on forest fire. A lot of our ecosystems need this for their survival and their health. And so it is an essential part of the landscapes across our country. That being said, we do see stressors each year and different ways that fire can challenge us. So some years we have a lot of fires. Some years we have a really tragic fire that comes through a community. And other years, like this year, we just have a lot of area covered by fire. This year is very much a year of big fires, and that's reflected in our total area burned, as well as the smoke events that we've been seeing across the country and drifting into the U.S.
I think it's the largest in a century. Is that right? This is the biggest fires we've had in more than 100 years?
Yeah, we've just crossed about 4.5 million hectares burned, which is well above typical for us. It's a huge landmass.
So the obvious question is there probably multiple answers to this, but why? Why is it the biggest one in 100 years?
Yeah, so the big thing you've got to remember is that this is a bunch of different forces multiplying together. Anyone who tells you it's one single story is selling something. It's a bunch of factors that are all combining and are greater than the sum of their parts when they multiply on each other. So there is a climate rule, for instance. Because of climate change, we can deal with seasons that run longer, that are hotter, that are drier, and that plays a huge part. That also taxes the institutions and the response responders that we have dealing with this, if they're dealing with longer seasons, if they're go from fire to fire, that can exhaust folks and exhaust our apparatus. But there are also other issues that multiply with that climate factor. So for instance, where we build, right? Where we put our homes and our infrastructure and our communities, that affects this, because the more people we have living at the interface or mixed in with forested environments, the more people need protecting, and the more impressive that protection has to be. And so these kinds of factors really multiply together to increase the fire load as well as the sort of demand on the response for our country.
Eric, I was going to wait to bring up climate and climate change, but you opened the door, so I'll walk through it. The Premier of Alberta, Daniel Smith, balks at the whole climate change theory, and in fact says the real enemy is arson. What's your reaction to this?
Yeah, arson does occur, and it, along with all sorts of human ignitions, are things that we need to prevent. And so there absolutely is that typical message you hear of, like, make sure your campfires are out. Make sure that you're really cautious when you're out there on an ATV, because that can accidentally start a fire. If you're in industry, make sure that if you're in a railroad or a timber yard, that you're following the protocols and best practices, because human-caused fires are a huge problem. It varies from location to location across the country. So in Nova Scotia, it's the vast majority of fires. In, say, northern Alberta, it's a much lower fraction. But human fires play a role. Arson is only a small component of those human fires, though, and typically sits in the sort of low to mid single digits. The estimates I've seen range between about 2 and 8% of fires. And so it does occur, but these are not a driving force, and it is certainly not the area burned. Arson fires tend to occur where people are in the south of the provinces, where we have a lot of firefighters ready. And so it doesn't explain the big fires that we see in the north in a typical season.
So in a season like this, where it's much larger than we've seen in other years, how does the priority? I think it's an obvious question, but how does the priority? How do they triage? I guess is my question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we've seen lots of years where we just don't have enough capacity to respond to the fires. That would be an enormous whole of society mobilization to try and come up with that capacity, bigger than any war effort you could imagine, to try to suppress every fire in Canada. It would just be outlandish. And so triage does have to happen. And that could be because you have a lot of little fires starting, or it could be because you have a lot of big fires going simultaneously. For fire management agencies, the priority is always protecting life and property first. And so they go hard and fast against those fires that pose a risk to communities, that pose a risk to infrastructure. Those are the fires that they're trying to tackle quickly, immediately, and keep contained. What it means is that sometimes if there's a fire in a more remote area, a fire where those impacts might not be as directly felt, that fire might be a little bit low on the priority list as they're working to protect life and property. Now, in reality, it's a little bit more complicated than that. We also are trying to work in the beneficial ecological effects. So are there places where the fire should be allowed to burn to help the environment or the ecosystem? There might also be different kinds of values that they're trying to protect. So maybe hunting grounds or traditional indigenous territory. They might be trying to tackle a fire to prevent a huge smoke load. And so there can be different reasons that play into that complexity. But at the end of the day, the fire management agencies are really built to protect life and to protect property first.
Some of the reporting I've read over the last month, including from our reporters, is about how stretched the fire services are, especially in Ontario, right? There's been talk in the last couple of years about how a lot of people have left the profession because it's, from lack of a better term, from burnout, right? So there's a shortage of qualified people to do the work. We're also hearing problems or questions about whether we have enough of water bombers, for example, to do the job we need to do. I mean, what do you hear in terms of let's stick with the labor shortage? Do we have enough people who are trained to do this kind of work?
Yeah, so there are some challenges there. The seasonality that you're hinting at is a real challenge. Retaining people between seasons, and especially if this is a job you're doing as a student and then maybe thinking about different paths after that. And so the agencies are thinking a lot about retention and how you can keep that skill in the organization. And sometimes that involves broadening out. And so there have been a number of agencies that have been working to bring in more Indigenous fighters along the way as a way of having that capacity capacity there in an ongoing sense, and using that expertise and that mastery of fire as well. But it is a challenge with retention and making sure that you have that knowledge and that experience within the fire service. Another piece to remember is that no individual province can realistically staff for the worst case scenario. And so the way the Canadian system works, and I think it's actually a really important factor, is through mutual aid and sharing. We loan equipment to each other during our times of need. And so if Alberta's having a really bad fire season, the country comes together to support that. And then in a future year when Ontario has that really bad season, Alberta comes and supports us. And that is a really effective system for making sure that we have capacity across the country and for getting experience for firefighters from different provinces. You get an opportunity to work in different geographies and different settings and upskill that way. And so that system is really important and effective, but it's only as strong as all the provinces that are contributing to it. And so it's important that every province continue to invest in their own capacity so that it's available to share during these peak loads.
Mm-hmm. Talk about sharing. Just earlier this week in Quebec, because of the situation there and our aging fleet of water bombers, they had to bring some in from Montana. So it's not just within Canada, it's countries helping countries.
Yeah, and you do kind of see that from Europe, right? I think they have some European firefighters that have come over to Ontario as well. Am I accurate on that?
Yeah, we often bring in fire management personnel from Australia, from Europe. We have a lot of support from the States. There's also sharing that happens in Mexico and South Africa, where we have firefighters coming in from those contexts. And so this global sharing is really important. And there are some great mechanisms for doing that through the Canadian Interagency Forest Fire Center. Mm-hmm. They do just impressive work to keep that moving all season long.
It is pretty amazing to watch from the outside. We're up in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and so there's a lot of water bombers at the airport here, and just to watch them do their thing, and it's quite fascinating. I guess we can expect that. I think we can expect that summers like this may be more the norm than not the norm going forward, right? For all the reasons you talked about earlier. You're an expert in emergency management and preparedness. What do we need to do differently to maybe be better prepared in, say, a decade from now?
Yeah, it's a big challenge, but there are a few things that we can take on. So number one, we have to keep investing in the fire response infrastructure that we have and make sure that retention's there, the equipment is there and ready, the personnel are there. That is absolutely an important part. We also have to look, though, at building resilient communities, right? We are seeing the ways that fire is going to roll through many of our neighborhoods and many of the places we care about. And so making sure that we're building them in a way that is able to be easily defended, we're able to be resilient when the fire arrives is critical. And so that's things like building codes and standards, but it's also maintenance of property and making sure you have the fire breaks and all of the fire smart activities that we would talk about. We also have to be ready for coupled disasters, the way that these can link up. So a flood after a fire, for instance, can be really damaging because of some of the runoff that you get from the ash and the burnt material. You can also have these kinds of overlapping events where you have a heat emergency and a fire happening simultaneously. And so jurisdictions have to be ready for these intersecting disasters to occur at the same time.
Eric, before we let you go, I want to give you some props here and talk about one of your areas of expertise is preparing communities for future fire events and the role that ethics and values play within fire. Can you kind of dumb that down for Frisco and I and tell us what that means and explain it a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that I talk a lot about is the fact that fire science can help us, but we do have to have the difficult conversations about what we're trying to achieve and how we want to get there, right? Fire response is an expensive operation, for example, and we as a society need to talk about how much we want to invest, how much more we want to put into this, and how we can use money effectively. We continue to build communities in really risky places, whether that's in floodplains or whether that's in fiery landscapes. And we have to have some tough conversations about if we think that is a wise idea or how we could build there in wiser ways that we could maybe adapt the building codes again or the design or the kinds of properties that we're building there to make sure that we're more fire resilient. And so I think sometimes in the quest for statistics and science, we lose some of these questions of what are we trying to achieve and what's the best way of getting there. And we've got to have those conversations sometimes.
That's a great point. I have wondered that, right? Because you obviously want to put all the resources you can, like you said, to protect people's lives and protect property. But sometimes there is a risk that a person takes to say, I'm going to live here. This is where I'm going to live out in this area where there may be a forest fire, for example. Is that something we need to, as a society, need to be thinking more of when we start thinking about where we're going to live, for example?
Yeah, and it's a conversation that's quite active. Out of California, for example, we've heard about insurance companies pulling out from insuring some of these properties. And there are no easy answers here, right? If you don't make insurance available, you have people who are really vulnerable and precarious if a fire event occurs. And many people choose to live in these places for quite reasonable reasons, whether that's because they've always been there, because they have a connection to the land, because that's where they can afford to live, because that's where they want to work. And so there are no simple answers to this question, but it's important to have these deliberations and conversations in a thoughtful and meaningful way so that we can talk about some of the trade-offs and we can think about how to do this more wisely. So if we do want to live in proximity to a forest, how can we build our homes and our roads and our urban planning in a way that's going to make it easier for firefighters to do their job, make it less likely for fire to come through in the first place, and increase the odds that a property will be there to come back home to after the fire event occurs.
All right, good stuff. Eric Kennedy, Associate Professor of Disaster and Emergency Management at York University. Good to see you, Eric. Thanks for doing this today.
Thanks so much for having me.
From newsmakers to celebrities to other prominent guests, you'll find them all on Village Media's new interview series, Up Close and Personal. Join host Scott Sexsmith as he goes one-on-one with well-known Canadians to hear their story. Up Close and Personal. Look for it on your favorite Village Media website across Ontario.
Back to wrap on another episode of Inside the Village. Smart guy, Eric Kennedy. Love when we get to have meaningful, engaging conversations about important topics like that.
Yeah, that's the goal of the podcast, is kind of go a bit behind the headlines. And I mean, he actually paid us a compliment at the end. I don't know if he was lying or not, but he said he really appreciated, he's kind of done the rounds with some media, and he appreciated the thoughtful questions a little bit deeper. So
I wasn't sure if we were being punked. I was looking for, what's his name, Ashton Kutcher, to jump out. And
I know. We'll take. Or he probably got off the call and was like, "Oh, thank God, I'm done with those guys." But you know what? We'll take the compliment when we can get it. So yeah, I learned a lot from that conversation. So that's something.
Absolutely, and feel free to reach out to us anytime at itv@villagemedia.ca. It's nice to see the number of emails that we're getting now. I know that we joked and mocked when we first started, but man, it's been busy.
Yeah, a lot of great stuff and a lot of interesting topics. I keep thinking now, we've done enough of these shows that something will happen in the news and we'll say, oh, let's go back and look at, remember who we spoke to about this issue, or reach back out to that person. And that's the great thing. We want to have conversations on this show that we hope that the listeners will walk away and say, oh, I know more than I did about that issue after listening to ITV. So that's the goal. itv@villagemedia.ca. Back episodes, everybody knows this, but here's the reminder. You can get them across the Village Media Network at insidethevillage.ca, and of course, wherever you get your favorite podcast. Each and every episode of Inside the Village is produced executively by Mr. Derek Turner. He'll be back next week, as will Michael Friscolanti, Editor-in-Chief here at Village Media, and I'm Scott Sexsmith. Have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you next Wednesday.
You've been listening to Inside the Village.
Frisco and Scott's wardrobe provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.